Right. Yeah. I guess that's how we're supposed to do the reading too.
I think everyone is here. If you'd all please take your seats, we can get started.
George Fitch, Christmas Eve, Nanking, China, 1937. What I am about to relate is a story which I feel must be told, even if it is seen by only a few. I cannot rest until I have told it, and perhaps fortunately I am one of a very few who are in a position to tell it. It is not complete, only a part of the whole, and God alone knows when it will be finished. I pray it may be soon, but I am afraid it is going to go on for many months to come. I believe it has no parallel in modern history.
Bob Wilson. I was born and grew up here in China. My parents were both missionaries. I went away to medical school at Harvard, but I came back here to live and practice medicine. Nanking is my home.
Minnie Vatran, Dean of Jingling Women's College in Nanking. I'm from Secor, Illinois, a small farming town on the prairie.
John Rabe. I moved to China from Hamburg on business over 30 years ago. I married my childhood sweetheart from Germany, and we raised our 2 children here. For the last 6 years, I've been director of Siemens China company here in Nanking, the capital.
南京本来是很美，有悬湖很大。南京市里的一个很大的公园。法国胡同已经那个时候就很有，这几条马路很好看。
那南京是很普遍的，那生活蛮好。我们吃的不胖身。那时候有脚踏车是不了不起的，是吧？那种脚踏车去的几个朋友在一块这儿玩玩。
我小时候呢，我不知道什么是，也不知道什么叫穷。反正我有学啥蛮高兴的。
Newsreel, August 1937. Today, out of the Far East come grim messages of a new conflict. The gory chronicle of Japan's war to crush all China,
gain for herself sole mastery of the Orient. Shanghai tastes war at its worst. For in a war of today, there is a new element. The fearsome, haphazard modern fighting that takes its toll on peaceful cities and their non-competent population.
南京是我们中国人首都嘛。那时候他肯定像南京大，很多人换，有很多人估计日本人打的上海，他目的就是要进攻南京。
We always knew Japan wanted China. I knew it since I was little. My parents always said Japan wants to conquer China because we have all the land and all the wealth, and we were right next door.
外头多少人讲，那个，在我们没家长之前，就像飞机来了，飞机就真的就放飞机的。
Everywhere, dugouts can be seen. Some places, they are as close as every 200 feet. Just as you would show your rose garden to your friends when they call. Now it's customary to take your friends to your trenches and caves to ask their opinion.
就是拿了个位子，拿了位子时候，大家一起跑来跑，那个公安员呢就过去叫警察了，嘿，不能出来。
Today we had a genuine thrill. First air raid that any of us had ever experienced. It probably won't be the last.
去过中环以后，听到天上飞机声音，然后我抬头一看，6架飞机，前面3架是银灰色，后面3架是深灰色的。我还讲了，这是我们中国飞机，现在这个追日本飞机，晓得吧？我们那是个学生，反正也还有点爱国吧，对吧？
这个东西我们10几岁怎么知道这个事情呢？不知道，是吧？就工程了，门口人一起朝家里跑，那个机枪嘎嘎嘎嘎嘎嘎嘎嘎嘎嘎嘎，就那么声音。吹出这个声音之后啊，就听到那个飞机哐。
这个飞机，俯横冲下来的是那种怪声啊，吓死人，是吧？我们还是青少年，是吧？吓得要命，也不晓得往哪里走，就看见大人往一个城墙的一个香当子里头走，我也跟着就往香当子里走了。就在这个时候，我也倒下去了。一倒下去，一看这个地方滚烫的，很热，那个好像有一种热水在身上浇的一样。哎呀，我爬不起来了。飞机冲下来，看着一个炸弹就下来了，炸弹炸在那个水里，砰！这个上面的人呢，统统都没有了，统统的一起倒了，一起不讲话了。我就拼命的哭，喊我爸爸，喊我妈妈，喊着呢。我父亲到处喊我的名字，找我。我听见这个声音，熟悉了，一喊，你想想看，父亲看到我，找不到，为什么找不到我？我那个脸已经是黑红了，对吧？紫红色了，已经是灰啊、血啊，什么都有。我父亲就把我这水里往上拉不动，费了9牛2虎之力，我的父亲才把我拖上来。就把我2个膀子拖了，往身上一背。
During the worst of the bombing on the 19th and 20th of September, I sat with my Chinese in our homemade dugout, which is certainly not bomb-proof, but at least provides protection against shrapnel and bomb fragments. Out in the garden, we have also spread a 20 by 20 foot piece of canvas with a swastika painted on it. In the long hours of crouching in the dugout during the recent bombardment, I turned on Radio Shanghai to take my mind off things with a little music. And they were playing Beethoven's Funeral March. Then, to make matters worse, they announced to their listeners, "This music is kindly dedicated to you by the Shanghai funeral directors."
Most of the shops on the business streets are locked. And the city has a deserted and forlorn look. The glances cast at me as much as say, "What? Are you still here?"
September 25th. This has been a terrible day. Bombs seem to be raining around. Nanking was subjected to 3 terrific air raids. The count of raids and alarms has now risen to 39. Gallons of civilian blood flowed today.
Under such circumstances, can I? May I cut and run? I don't think so. Anyone who has ever sat in a dugout and held a trembling Chinese child in each hand through the long hours of an air raid can understand what I feel. The rich are fleeing. The poor remain behind. They don't know where to go. They don't have the means to flee. Aren't they in danger of being slaughtered in great numbers? Shouldn't one make an attempt to help them? There's a question of morality here, and so far I haven't been able to sidestep it.
南京很多难民是上海逃过来的，上海逃过来，听过他们讲过，日本人很厉害很坏，说日本人杀人、强奸妇女有，是吧？那个一传的话，老百姓都走了，走得很快，走了。
Tuesday evening, we took our entire hospital staff to Shakuan Station, where about 1,200 Chinese soldiers lay around.
We found the soldiers scattered thickly at the station. Some men were in great agony. One of the men had his leg shot off up near the hip. The wound had not been attended. The odor of his flesh, I can never forget. When I reached home, I first washed with Lysol and then soap, but the odor still remained. I used cold cream and then later perfume, but all day today I am still conscious of it.
南京城那时候比较老百姓比较恐慌了，稍微条件好的呢，有钱的人呢都跟着走。我们家呢比较困难一点，因为我们生活能过得去，但是我们没有更多的钱出去逃难了，那个人也多，但是呢就没有走。
At 9 p.m., a letter came by special messenger from the embassy. They are asking all men and women to evacuate Nanking. It was a very clear, emphatic statement.
Standing offshore from the doomed city is the United States gunboat Panay of the Yangtze Patrol. Fleeing from the beleaguered city, a number of Americans and others arrive at the riverside, hoping to get aboard the Panay. Diplomats representing the United States government pack important state papers and head for the Panay in cars prominently marked with the American colors.
I personally feel that I cannot leave. Men are not asked to leave their ships when they are in danger, and women are not asked to leave their children.
If Americans leave, a great many of the Chinese would go also. The hospital would have to close or be operated by military authorities. One can't help feeling that leaving right now would be passing up an opportunity for service of the highest kind.
My 祖母就跟我爸爸讲，说你们看到轰炸轰那么厉害，你们呢想办法走吧，不要顾我们了，我们年纪大了。当时我父亲呢，为了尽孝道，还不肯走，不愿意走。
At 1:30 this afternoon, I drove to Chongchang Wharf. After a brief goodbye to the passengers, I take the launch, which is honking impatiently now, back to Shack 1. My last bridge is burned.
The city is practically deserted now, except for the poor who have no place to go.
This morning, after the service began, the warning siren sounded. The pastor asked, shall we continue or go to a dugout? One man said, continue. And we did so. Life is real. Life is earnest these days. Slowly, the heavy bombers drew near. When the bombing could be plainly heard inside the city, the pastor stopped preaching and asked us all to pray silently for peace.
Nanking一片恐怖。原来讲日本人要快到了，Nanking呢乘红家，乘飞机加个2个日本人又进城了。
The Chinese appear to regard Shanghai as the main theater of war because Shanghai protects Nanking. But for how long?
Smoke-filled skies signal to the world the final chapter of the greatest war drama yet filmed. The actual fall of Shanghai.
到了上海2个小时不到就退的了，也不行，命令退了，自然的退了。你没得东西打什么打？那个也没得子弹，也什么都没有，就靠那背2个子弹到了，前方的打了，摔了就没有了，那打嘛打，啊，那人送死的，那人给他打死的，那
一撤退嘛，打的退就打的退，铁路先退。实际上很大，都是步兵的。 步兵连、机枪连，好些，有的就真的20-30个人，损失很大。
但是是退了，打的退的，从上海已经退到南京，走到南京啊。
At 10 a.m., the order came. Regiment is to pursue enemy towards Nanking. All troops are to be ready immediately. General Matsui said Nanking is the capital of China, and our capturing of it will be an international event. With General Matsui's principle in mind, we began immediately to make our plans.
From the Tokyo Nichi newspaper, reported on the road to Nanking. There are 2 young commissioned officers who have undertaken a contest to cut down 100 with their swords. It is said that one man has already killed 56 men and the other has killed 25. When we reporters came upon the 2 of them conferring, Second Lieutenant Mukai said, with things going like this, I'll probably cut down 100 by the time we reach Danyang, never mind Nanking. You're going to lose. My sword has killed 55 and it's only got 1 little nick on it. Second Lieutenant Noda responded, by the time you're in Danyang, I'll show you what kind of a record I can rack up.
Every time we seize a village on the way to Nanking, newly commissioned officer will test their swords on the defeated Chinese soldiers. When you behead someone, you need to use a strong stroke, so you raise the sword high and bring it down with force. The head falls and blood flies straight up like a red pillar of fire. There's an officer I know who always bragged about killing people. He would tie the wrists and ankles with ropes so that a person to be beheaded wouldn't be able to stand or stretch his legs. Everyone copied his style.
他们都讲日本人来了，日本人杀人哎，就讲日本人杀人，上光正财，杀光烧光抢光。他抢人家东西啊，烧人家房子啊，杀人家人啊，我们就害怕了。
Tonight's news, none too good. Conditions look bad, rumors and unrest. Word is the Japanese are approaching from 3 directions.
妈妈爸爸讲哎，不得了嘞，这怎么搞的？没得路的走了，要死一起死在一块算了，就这样讲。要死就死到一块。
Over and over again, I am struck by the similarity of Jesus' day and today in China. 3 other missionaries and I spent an hour and a half today trying to see what Christians can do in this present situation. Are we to stand by hopelessly, or is there something we can do? And if so, what?
Telegram we sent to the Japanese ambassador. An international committee composed of nationals of Denmark, Germany, Great Britain, and the United States desires to suggest to the Chinese and Japanese authorities the establishment of a safety zone for civilian refugees at or near Nanking. The committee would respectfully request a prompt reply from the Japanese authorities to this proposal.
We will bear tremendous responsibility if we first order the remaining populace of Nanking into the neutral zone and then later are turned down by the Japanese.
To our surprise, the big-hearted German who had elected chairman turned out to be the National Socialist leader here.
I continue to hope that Hitler will help us. He has deep sympathy not only for the distress of his own people, but for the anguish of the Chinese as well.
So now it turns out that the burden of work is to be carried out by a group of American missionaries and a group of German Nazi businessmen.
At 2:30, as I walked down Shanghai Road, again and again I met groups of women and children in search of the safety zone. I told them that it was not yet certain, but when it was, they would be notified. The safety zone is not yet assured.
Telegram to the United States Embassy. Japanese authorities have duly noted request for a safety zone, but regret cannot grant it.
According to radio reports, London regards this reply as a flat-out refusal. We are of a different opinion here. Their answer is cleverly couched in the diplomatic terms, leaving a back door open.
Mayor Ma virtually turned over to us administrative responsibilities for the zone, along with a police force of 450 men, 2,000 tons of rice, 10,000 bags of flour, and some salt.
Since Mayor Ma left Nanking yesterday, and since the committee is forced to deal with all the administrative problems and workings inside our safety zone, I have in face of this become something very like an acting mayor. Enough to give you a fit, Rob.
The Japanese are now nearing the halfway mark from Shanghai, and we have already heard the rumble of big guns.
上哪里走呢？那时候没得地方走。后来讲南京有难民区，是国际党成立的难民区。如果我们进了难民区了嘛，好像就保险了，飞机不会轰炸了，就这个意思。
Thousands of refugees are fleeing into our so-called safety zone from all directions. The sight of the poorest of the poor wandering aimlessly in the streets is enough to make you weep. As it grows dark, some families, unable to find shelter anywhere, stretch out to sleep in nooks and alcoves of buildings or simply on the street, despite the cold. We are working feverishly to develop the zone.
到难民区呢，还有一个花小队。 来给他们，来招引他们，来救他们，是吧？你只要到的美国的花小水那个地方去了，这我妈跟我讲的就好了。
我们走到难民区，那个德国人跟翻译讲，我们忍住了。他晚上呢还黑了，房子搭好了，地下铺的都厚掉。 睡得高头都暖和。第二天早上，一个人一小碗米，吃不了。
Around us here, we now have thousands of poor people crowded into all the available buildings. What will happen to them is mere conjecture. The zone is all marked with flags and banners, and so far the Japanese have not bombed it. We still have hopes that even if they do not recognize it, they might respect it. If they do, it will mean the saving of thousands of lives of poor people. Five air raids on Monday and one on Tuesday. I'm writing this during our 61st.
Tonight, the flames are lighting the sky above the whole southwest corner of the city. And in the afternoon, we have seen clouds of smoke rising in every direction, save northwest.
It is quite a sensation to be the only surgeon in a big, war-torn city. How can we leave the sick patients? Japs have now reached a point about 25 miles from the city. Gunfire could be heard. It won't be long now.
The city gates are to be closed tomorrow. I sent a telegram to Siemens today asking them to pay up any life insurance premiums that may be due. If I were to say I was not afraid, I'd be lying.
The swift Japanese advance on the national capital make the vicinity of Nanking a place of danger. The Nipponese invaders strike westward with incredible speed. The defenders bravely ignore a Japanese ultimatum calling on them to surrender.
If you're getting the same sort of radio reports that we are, you are undoubtedly alarmed for our safety here. But we're a little concerned ourselves. Today's air raid brings our tally to 114. The tally must come to a close, as today was one long air raid from morning till night. I am writing this to the tune of big guns just outside of the city. Japanese advance guards have reached the walls in several places.
Until about 1 p.m. December 10th, General Skada and I had been waiting outside of Chansan Gate for the bearer of the flag of truce from the Chinese army. However, he never came. For that reason, from about 2 p.m., a general attack was commenced against Nanking.
Shells from Japanese guns commenced falling inside the city walls, and I went outside to watch them. They formed a perfect pattern, the explosions advancing in regular rows about 25 yards every half minute. They were coming from outside the south gate, directly towards me.
Uninterrupted artillery fire from Purple Mountain. Thunder and lightning around the hill. And suddenly the whole hill is in flames. An old adage says, when Purple Mountain burns, Nanking is lost.
December 13th. I was in the middle of my service when the telephone rang and I answered it. I was asked to immediately go to the Zone Committee's headquarters. The Japanese had broken into the city.
The wall had been breached, and the damage to the southern part of the city was tremendous. No one will ever know what the Chinese casualties were, but they must have been enormous. Soldiers streamed through the city from the south, many of them passing through the zone.
They 听到外面叫，有人叫，救命啊！杀人呐！杀人呐！叫。但是就在一个念头还没想透的时候，那边日本兵冲进来了，冲进几个人兵，前面那个我就看了3个，挎着大刀，端着枪进来了。他一看到了我已经，砰开枪，一枪前面人打倒下来了，这打倒下来就慌了，啊，救起来了。 我母亲抱着我的挺小的弟弟，小弟弟拼命的哭，妈妈就给他吃奶，叫他不要哭。就在这个时候，那个日本鬼子扎了刺刀，一刺刀戳到我母亲就把我母亲倒下来了，倒下来小孩掉了要快掉的地下来了，母亲还撑着坚持的，弟弟抱他没给他掉下去。鬼子把这个刺刀拔出去以后，又一刺刀戳到我母亲倒脚还倒下来，把我弟弟摔在地下了，我弟弟丢在地下。地下我们就哭喊哦，不要戳我妈妈，不要戳我妈妈。这个时候呢，我那个顶小的弟弟不是给鬼子戳的掉地下了吗？有个鬼子弟弟在底下哭呢，那个鬼子把我那2个弟弟戳倒了以后，看那小孩在哭，在我弟弟屁股高头一刺刀一跳，我走了进来，看到我妈妈摔在那，摔个头呛到那个柱子边，看摔了看，摔了看了，我一看到我妈妈摔了看。我妈妈没死，看到我看到我妈妈，2个眼睛对我看我的妈妈你怎么样？我的妈妈也看到我眼里直掉，妈不能讲话，看到嘴里动动讲不出来。我那边有小孩哭的声音，好像是我弟弟。我明白妈妈意思了，我说妈妈我可以看一下啊，是不是小爸爸我那个顶小的弟子叫爸爸？我就走了去找到地下全是死人，地下全是血，那个地下挖的血，踩的就在那发黏了，那个天特别冷。我绕前头一堆死人，几个堆着块，中间一个窿大，一个小孩趴在那块，像他草上爬。那时候我弟弟在那哇哭，喊妈妈哭，我弟弟还没死。我开了以后我就喊。我说小宝，他听到我的喉咙中扑通掉过来了，拼命的朝我前面，朝我这个跟前窜，但是因为天又冷，小鞋子也跑掉了，2个小脚袜子也没有了，小脚冻得通红，全是血。这时候妈妈看到我小弟弟放下来以后，我妈妈拼命的挣扎，把手撑起来，把衣服拽怀里面的衣服，把溜子改回来，拼命的拽回来给我弟弟吃来。叫我弟弟呢，看到我妈妈把衣服拽下来以后，拼命跑到妈妈怀里去再吃来。我妈妈把衣服拽过来以后，我看了几个刀伤，都在流血。我弟弟在吃来，靠母亲奶子边上一个刀伤里头还冒血泡泡。我弟弟不懂事，拼命在吃来，血泡泡动，我就赶快上去。我妈妈，我跟你捂的。我说你坚持一会儿，会好的。妈妈，我听你捂的。可是我妈妈不能讲话，眼泪直掉。掉了，头一倒过去了，倒过去就眼睛也不吱声。我晓得下我妈妈可能死了，我摇她，她也不响。我喊她妈妈你起来，她也不起来。我怎么喊她，她也不起来。我就是想她妈妈死了，我说怎么办呢？
In the morning, the fresh blood-colored flags of the rising sun were fluttering everywhere, each proclaiming with its red symbol the freshly spilled blood of Nanking.
Three dangers are past: that of looting soldiers, bombing from airplanes, and shelling from big guns, but the fourth is still before us. Our fate at the hands of a victorious army.
記憶してますわ。
枪下伤人，爸爸可能就死在地下，可能就是我出去看妈妈，妈妈倒在爸爸怀里的，地下一大堆血，一大滩血哦。
It's not until we tour the city that we learn the extent of the destruction. We come across corpses every 100 or 200 yards. The bodies of civilians that I examined had bullet holes in the backs. These people had presumably been fleeing and were shot from behind.
日本人进来的时候，当时领导我3刀，但是我有死过了。当时我醒的时候，看到我妈妈就睡在桌子外的，衣裳一起扒掉了，我的小妹妹就死在院子里头。我姐姐呢，有衣裳都没有，也不晓得给她盖，不知道就这样的。后来我们出来，摇这个也不喝，摇那个也不喝，没得一个活人了。然后他就是这个从那个时候，大北先生他就是他就叫马基，马基是拍照的，他当时就叫马基，派人就到我家了，到我家照相的。9个人死了7个。
他把人家姑娘，一搞几十个姑娘，几十个姑娘排起队来，他选好的。我一想，我说我想个办法，你知道我想个办法把头发剪来的。日本人还来找我麻烦，你是姑娘，要3个。 我说你胡说！你看我是男娃女娃，觉得还讲他说，他往我笑笑啊，还点点头。
From 8:30 this morning until 6 this evening, I stood at the front gate of Jingling College as the refugees poured in. They had disguised themselves in every possible way. Many had cut their hair, most of them had blackened their faces. Many were wearing men or boys' clothing, or even that of old women.
活下去就长了块烂刀，烂刀他不怕呀，是吧？所以就不给他进去，然后把旗子一挂，美国旗子一挂，他就不敢动了。他是3命救人，真是3命救人。
Nanking has no lights, no water, no telephone, no telegraph, no city paper, no radio. We are indeed separated from all of you by an impenetrable zone.
The Japanese march through the city in groups of 10 to 20 soldiers and loot the shops. They smash open windows and doors and take whatever they like. We run across a group of 200 Chinese workers whom Japanese soldiers have picked up off the streets of the safety zone, and after having been tied up, are now being driven out of the city.
At the last moment, thousands of Chinese soldiers threw away their uniforms and equipment, looted civilian clothes, and crowded into the zone.
I had made up my mind to bury the Chinese soldiers' clothes. They had been thrown onto the campus by the fleeing soldiers, but when I got to the carpenter's shop, I could see that the gardeners were wiser. They had burned them and thrown the grenades into a pond.
At headquarters, we found a mob of men outside that had been disarming. About 1,300 in all. We argued the Japanese would not shoot disarmed men, so we went to our staff conference quite relieved.
We knew that there were a number of ex-soldiers among them, but Rabe had been promised by an officer that very afternoon that their lives would be spared.
But in a half hour, we were called back. The Japanese had come back for them.
The men were lined up and roped together in groups of about 100 by Japanese soldiers with bayonets fixed.
那个外国人的话，好几个了，把那个机关枪那么一拉了走。你要打，把我们先打死。
I tried for hours to prevent the Japanese from marching these men out for execution, but I failed.
By the light of our headlights, we watched them march away to their doom. Not a whimper came from the entire throng. our own hearts were led.
During this time, we really felt that we were contending with the powers of evil. This memory will remain with me forever. We could do nothing to avert this tragedy.
Japanese 6th Brigade, Operation Order 138. Since the defeated enemy soldiers are believed to be in plain clothes, you must arrest any person who is suspected of being so. Regard every adult man up to middle age as a plainclothes soldier.
There is no system. Soldiers seize anyone they suspect. Calluses on hands are proof the man is a soldier. Rickshaw coolies, carpenters, and other laborers are frequently taken.
我们正在吃饭的时候，来了3个日本兵，把每一家的人啊一起乱在一个大院子里边，就把所有的老头儿、老太、小孩儿、什么小妇女一起把它摆旁边，有些年轻人什么统统的一起围起来啊，他们一起把走。我家里面那个时候就是这么些人啊，我记不清楚多少了。我家里面去了5个，我是最清楚的。我的哥哥，跟我3个表哥，1个表叔。但是到第2天，就听见门口人啊，3个4个一起集中一块儿，一堆一堆的。你家的儿子回来没有？你家的是这个哥哥回来了，互相张望了。
I took moving pictures of a group of about 70 or so Chinese men being gathered on the road, and in the picture, the women are kneeling before the Japanese, begging for their menfolk.
这工厂嘛，人的就是很多了，好多啊人，对吧？集中了。集中嘛，他就讲了，他说你们怎么抵抗王军，怎么一定要杀的。你们还用燃烧弹来烧，还用步枪打，开机关枪扫射，还能起到了捅。啊，有的人说，还问你怎么死？我说你杀人就杀人了，还能怎么死啊？还这道理的。
これはまあ南京を守っとる兵隊が何万人おったか5万おったか3万おったか大きな南を守ったわけ。捕虜を集めて日本軍が管理するような能力はないでしょうが。だったらそこからじゃあどうするかとなったらそういう方法しかないの違うかな。
后来哎呀，好多人就哭了。哎呀，我的爸爸妈妈，你们不走，马上送命了。我几个同事我也说的，哎呀，我怎么我这短命啊？17岁我怎么没得命啊？马上死了。我说我爸爸妈妈还不知道。哎呀，有的也哭的，有的好像说我死了，我还不愿意给他杀的，也有中，我们看见了。有的就自己就中了枪了去的，也有跳到河里去都有。都有，那么前面就可以绑了，就10个一绑，10个一绑，10个一排，10个排，那地方大了，1块10个，10排100个，好大的地方。就这个给我绑了就拖到那边河边去，能起到捅到救苦连天。有的想捅死的，有的捅不来的嘛，就救去了。这边呢，到4、5点钟来不及了，杀不了了。后来听着机关枪咕扫射死了。我们都死死啊，我们就死死的爬，看见日本兵来了，我们就从死睡觉到，等到过去以后呢，我们又爬的就从河里跑，到了河边。
How many thousands were mown down by guns? Or bayoneted, we shall probably never know. But in many cases, oil was thrown over the bodies, and they were burned. Charred bones tell the story of many of those tragedies.
Tonight, that is tonight. You only do that in 연수공간 사무실장
맞짱이 고티 그래서 신나요 맞짱 허도가지 그래서 다 뒤시bat 그래서 여기 크라이들 여기로 가라 저기 간저기 됐다.
아스원 센지가 그러더니 그때 삼바신 나르더니 그때 시간조대 다다다다 센조대 했던지요.
또 그 내생에 상생인 신경 쓴다고 간단다 그래. 시간대기 뭐 오사를 그 30분 동안 가가 나갔던 데네 그나 그래. 도니까 그 카모 없이도이다 그 말이. 난데 그나 코이 흐트니 타나가 도로 연이 지나고 죽었다고
아주 저희끼리 먹기 이리를 너 먹을 거라. 그래가 저기 트이난다. 저사 긴 스키대 저긴 쓴다. 너만 히데오 야츠기 짰다. 그러나 하나님의 시선을 보이다스 그러네.
Some Japanese soldiers were fierce and unreasonable, and many of them had their bayonets ready for use. And on not a few of them, I saw fresh bloodstains.
他也知道有好多部队的生类到你医院里面去，否则你这个医院那么多一下子那么多人呢？我们受惊的都是为难民，其实这个人部队里面都变成难民。那么这一点呢，就是说，威尔逊医生也知道这么个情况，他为了争取这部分人，反正你都是中国人嘛，你总是病人，你是受伤的人嘛。 我不管你啥个部队，一律，只要是那个啊，他认为呢，你敌人也得要救他们，他不管。
There seems to be no stop to the ferocity of the brutes. At first I tried to be pleasant to them to avoid arousing their ire, but the smile has gradually worn off, and my stare is fully as cool and fishy as theirs.
他来那么3-4个，这个全身武装，身上有，他认为这个人是我带走就带走了。重伤病院他不管了，重伤病院他看到这个人快要死了，他也就不管你了。完了偷去的人，都是这个无奈了，喊叫也没用了，其他的人也没办法去帮他拉下来。
A colonel and his staff called at my office and spent an hour trying to discover where all the additional disarmed soldiers were.
They insisted that they were hiding within the zone and that we were responsible for concealing them.
大家都保密，都没得暴露，没有一个人暴露。这个小孩是当兵的，但没有人讲暴露，都喊我不要动，你不要开口，你躲了个的，那都这样互相关怀那。日本鬼子跑难民区里去了，那边做什么？把我们男人走一面，女人、妇女、小孩又赶一面，中间有鬼子站在中间，然后他把男的里面摘一个人出来，要人去认他。有的父亲找儿子的，有的妈妈找儿子的，有的妇女找丈夫的，那些人在那个蹦啊跳的，人头上都是人，大家看出来啊。 多数人拿出来没人，马上就走了，就把他拴起来，走了一边走了。
Miss Vatrin ran to us and begged us to claim someone. She told us if we claimed a man, we would save a life.
As long as you had a relative, the Japanese would assume you were not a soldier.
There were 2,000 or 3,000 young men, some soldiers, some not. We each claimed someone. All day I watched her running back and forth across Jinling in this work.
Sometimes one gets weary of spirit. There is so much suffering, so many in such difficult and impossible circumstances, it makes one hopeless. And when will it end?
I can see little indication of God in the tremendous wave of cruelty and greed that has engulfed a big piece of our world.
I wish Emperor Hirohito could see the mangled bodies of these simple Chinese common people, which his spokesman professed to love so much. Or that I could carry some of the men and women with legs blown off into the elegant parlors of the rich Americans who fatten on selling war supplies to Japan. They would probably worry more about their rugs than about the wounded.
Religious faith is believing that good things are worth doing for their own sake, even in a world that seems overpoweringly evil. I remain assured in hard experience that neither by national guns nor by national gods will mankind be saved, but only by the genuine regard for all members of the human family.
God, comfort the heartbroken mothers and fathers of innocent sons who were shot today. And guard the young women and girls through the agonizing hours of this night. Speed the day when war shall be no more.
In Nanking, we had time on our hands and nothing to do. So we raped girls.
他把人家女娃拖这个，人家不同的。他搞过以后，那个吃到的肚子，那个女娃睡得不能起来了，都知道一戳一脚，女娃死了。就我们远远的看的几个都是这样子啊，嗯。
結婚しとる人やったら分かっとるけど、娘が抑えたらブルブル震うとってこのまま誤解してもさ、ことも何も一つもあらへん。ああいうことっていうのはさ、二人が危険とさ、ことはねえわ。
今年连我儿媳只有13岁，他要进行侮辱我儿媳，我儿媳坚决不从，我儿媳搞了反抗。在反抗当中呢，就这么打到了日本兵2个嘴巴子，我姐姐打了2个嘴巴子，旁边的日本兵，他就挎着那个长刀啊，这么长的那个大刀啊，他把那长刀抽出来，把我13岁姐姐活活的劈掉了。活的劈死了，以后我们找到我姐姐的尸体，看到的，我姐姐是头子这个给砍的2板子，就是从中间砍2板子，他那个一刀下来，劈得来，把我姐姐活活的劈掉了。
叫拖我家爷爷不肯，我家爷爷说，他太小了。不能，他要弄刺刀戳他，要弄枪打他，后来我就讲了，我现在一想，我说我要不同意，妈我家爷爷死，我以后还是死，我要把我家爷爷救下来，我就叫我家爷爷，我就推他，我说你走，你看他把我弄得给怎么样？我现在这样讲，我就跟我家爷爷讲，我家爷爷不肯，我家爷爷说。你太小了，就讲他那个时候都喊我红子，我那个小哎呀，我12岁才多大。后来结果以后，我家爷爷好就走到站旁边， 站在旁边的时候，那个日本人把我拖着去呢，就在我们隔壁一个房间，他把我拦在床上说完了，后来他就说叫把裤子脱了的，我哭啊，我都哭得不得了，给他搞过以后，我不能起来，都昏过去了，不晓得了，他走了，后来我家爷爷来了，红子啊，我讲的吧，我说你不能啊，你可怜啊，我家爷爷就可怜就把我推哦，就那冰起来，慢慢揉，把我肚子慢慢揉，揉这个血哦，淌得一塌糊涂哦，我没得办法哈。哎呀，我现在讲，我说我不救你，你也死了，我怕我这个命要死了，我死我一个人，我不能死，我们死2个人，你晓得？
December 18th, Saturday. All days seem alike now. Went to gate at 7:30. A stream of weary, wild-eyed women were coming in. Said their night had been one of horror, that again and again their homes were visited by soldiers. 12-year-old girls, 60-year-old women, raped. If only the thoughtful people of Japan knew the facts of these days of horror.
We had on the grounds of our college more than 10,000 women and children refugees. Every night the soldiers would enter our grounds to get the girls, and every night Miss Vautran would try to keep them from the girls.
It seems in several homes near Westflower Gate, the soldiers, failing to find young girls, are using teenage boys. Tonight I asked George Fitch how the day went and what progress they had made. And his reply was, "It was hell today, the blackest day of my life." Certainly it was the same for me. Tonight a truck passed in which there were 8 or 10 girls, and as it passed they called, "Zhou Ming! Zhou Ming!" Save our lives.
6 Japanese climb over my garden wall and attempt to open my gates from the inside. When I arrive and shine my flashlight in the face of one of them, he reaches for his pistol. But his hand drops quickly enough when I yell at him and hold my swastika armband under his nose. Then, on my orders, all 6 have to scramble back over the wall. My gates will never be open to a riffraff like that.
这violacion医生呢，专门弄的一部分人口到，只要他一进来，马上把我们的 这个义务之委的医生都把他撤退到我们山路上面一个带到一个网去，等到他走了再下来，啊，有的是每天有好几次。站住了死的，走下来死的，蹲下来死的，死人把活人打死的，这人家不相信，这个活人怎么会给死人打死了？ 对啊，人家不相信。这个日本人马路上睡的死的妇女，他要叫这个活人跟他睡觉。这个我们都是看见，在什么地方？就在中华门进门一个桥上。
Every day we call at the Japanese embassy and present our protests and appeals, our reports of violence and crime.
For the kind attention of Mr. Kiyoshi Fukui, Second Secretary, Japanese Embassy. Dear sirs, we are very sorry to trouble you again, but the sufferings and needs of 200,000 civilians of whom we are trying to care make it urgent that we try to secure action from your military authorities to stop present disorder among Japanese soldiers wandering through the safety zone.
Case number 15. Japanese soldiers entered a house on Hankow Road, raped a young wife, and took away 3 women. When 2 husbands ran, the soldiers shot both of them.
Case number 154. A girl, 13 years old, was raped by 3 Japanese soldiers at Chinjiajiai number 6.
Case number 290. 4 soldiers raped a young girl, a little over 10, by turns.
Fukuda and Tanaka of the Japanese embassy had nothing to say, except Fukuda's remark that the army is very mad because they say it is the first time in history that an army had to conquer a place with neutral observers on hand. Quite a false view, but we felt it was not time to argue. We have come to understand the Japanese much better than we did. A week before their entry, I preached to our group and I urged them to have faith in the goodness and humanity of the Japanese. The Chinese are still laughing at us for our innocence. Now, we better understand Japanese propaganda. In the midst of great suffering, Japanese news squads went around staging pictures of Japanese soldiers giving candy to a child or an army doctor examining 20 children.
Some Japanese newsmen came to the camp and handed out cakes and apples and a few coins to the refugees. A moving picture was taken of this kind act. At the same time, a bunch of soldiers climbed the back wall of the compound and raped a dozen or so women. No pictures were taken out back.
We introduced the Commandant Matsui, who shakes hands all around. I assume the role of spokesman and explain to Mr. Tanaka of the Japanese embassy that we infer that the city is to be burnt down. Tanaka denies this with a smile.
Statement by the Japanese military posted throughout the city. The municipality of Nanking is quiet. The herds of refugees who fled for their lives from the midst of death have met with the gentle soothing of the Japanese army. The Imperial Army entered the city, put their bayonets into sheaths, and stretched forth merciful hands in order to examine and to heal, diffusing grace and favor to the excellent true citizens. Many thousands of refugees cast off their former absurd attitudes of opposing Japan and clasped their hands in congratulation for receiving assurance of life. Looking down, one sees a playground for Nanking children with soldiers and Chinese children playing joyfully on all sides.
The proclamation on the handbills, which airplanes scattered over the city, saying the Japanese are the only real friends of the Chinese and would protect the good, of course meant no more than most of their statements. And to show their sincerity, they raped, looted, and killed at will.
In these hard times, it is certainly a lifesaver to be in a gang. The thing about the whole situation that startles us all is how we, unarmed handful of foreigners, can chase the Japanese soldiers out of rooms in school buildings, rooms in foreign houses, and rooms in Chinese homes. And still, no one gets hurt. The soldiers often actually run away. Part of it is pure bluff. If we batted an eye, we'd be done for.
Our group here at the House drafted a message to the American Consulate General in Shanghai, asking that diplomatic representatives be sent here immediately as the situation was urgent. Then asked the Japanese to send it via Navy radio. Needless to say, it was never sent.
When things were at their worst, the fellows at our house remarked at supper, "The first fellow that gets killed, we are going to carry his body over and put it in the Japanese embassy." Each night, the 8 of us wonder who would be missing the next night. We said, we just can't all get through this alive.
At noon, a man was led to headquarters with head burned cinder black, eyes and ears gone, a nose partly gone. A ghastly sight. I took him to the hospital in my car, where he died a few hours later. His story was that he was one of a gang of some 100 who had been tied together, then gasoline thrown over them, and set afire.
December 24th, the day before Christmas. About 10 o'clock, I was called to my office by a high military advisor.
Miss Minnie Watrin, our American Minnie, a proper lady to the core. She believes in her girls and guards them the way a hen guards her chicks. I shall never forget her marching at the head of some 400 female refugees through the town, right past groups of vagabonding Japanese soldiers, to guide the refugees to the safety of her girls' camp in Jingling College. And now something terrible has happened to our Minnie.
The request was that they be allowed to pick out prostitute women from our 10,000 refugees. They said they wanted 100. They feel if they can start a regular licensed place for the soldiers, then they will not molest innocent or decent women.
And with hands clenched in horror, Minnie is forced to watch as authorized underlings force their way into her girls' assembly hall, filled with hundreds of good girls. She is not going to hand over even one of them willingly. But then, a number of young refugee girls step forward, evidently former prostitutes. Minnie is speechless.
They finally secured 21. But group after group of women have asked me if they will select the other 79 from the decent women and girls. And all I can answer is, they will not do so if it is in my power to prevent it.
Bob Wilson helped out at our house last night. He got home early for the first time in 2 weeks. So he went to the university gardens, brought 6 big poinsettias and put them around our living room. So we look like Christmas anyway.
Everyone is competing to make this a happy Christmas for me. It's really touching. Chang brought some Christmas roses and has decorated the house with them. He even managed to find a little fir tree that he wants to decorate. And he just came in grinning with joy and carrying 6 very long candles that he rounded up somewhere. Everybody likes me suddenly. And it used to be, or so I thought, that no one wanted to have much to do with me. Or might I have been wrong there? How strange, my dear Dora, my dear children and grandchildren. I know you're all praying for me today. I feel as if I am surrounded by loving thoughts. Believe me, I have a prayer in my heart for all of you as well.
This seems like anything but Christmas Eve. It is sort of tough to keep Japanese soldiers from looting a hospital in the center of what was, a few weeks ago, a great city, while the rest of the family is scattered all over the globe. My baby will be 6 months old in 4 days, and I have only seen her for 7 weeks of that time. It would be pleasant to close the year with some sort of brighter outlook for the next, but we seem to be closing on a note of deepest gloom, without a glimmer of light ahead. The only consolation is that it can't be worse. They can't kill as many people as there aren't any more to kill.
Christmas Eve, Nanking, China, 1937. What I am about to relate is a story which I feel must be told, even if it is seen by only a few. In these 2 short weeks, we here in Nanking have been through a siege. The Chinese army has left, defeated, and the Japanese have come in. On that day, Nanking was still the beautiful city we were so proud of, with law and order still prevailing. Today it is a city laid waste, ravaged, completely looted, much of it burned. Complete anarchy has reigned for 10 days. It has been a hell on earth. Not that my life has been in serious danger at any time, though turning lust-mad drunken soldiers out of houses where they were raping the women is not altogether a safe occupation. Nor does one feel perhaps too sure of himself when he finds a bayonet at his chest or a revolver at his head, and knows it is handled by someone who heartily wishes him out of the way. For the Japanese army is anything but pleased at our being here. They wanted no observers. But to have to stand by, while even the very poor are having their last possessions taken from them, their last coin, their last bit of bedding, while thousands of disarmed soldiers who had sought sanctuary with you, together with many hundreds of innocent civilians, are taken out before your eyes to be shot or used for bayonet practice. And we have to listen to the sounds of the guns that are killing them. Over 1,000 women kneel before you, crying, hysterically, begging you to save them from the beasts who are preying on them. To stand by and do nothing while your flag is taken down and insulted not once but 12 times, and your own house is being looted, and then to watch the city you have come to love, and the institutions which you'd planned to devote your best deliberately and systematically burned by fire. This is a hell I had never before envisaged. And we keep asking ourselves, how long can this last? Day by day, we are assured by the officials that things will be better soon, that we will do our best. But each day has been worse than the day before.
January 1st, a new year filled with hope. There was a worship ceremony at 8:30 this morning. In the solemn air, the trumpets sounded and the Japanese flag was raised. It is moving beyond words, with the swords sparkling in the rising sun. We saluted the military flag, gave 3 cheers for our Emperor and Empress.
January 4. It is just 3 weeks since Nanking was taken, and as yet, there has been no foreigner allowed in or out.
The Japanese try to cover things up wherever it's even vaguely feasible, and the ban on anyone entering or leaving is one of their ways of keeping the world ignorant of Nanking's present state. We have now received news that the Japanese want to close all refugee camps on February 4th. The refugees are supposed to return to the devastated city, and it doesn't matter where they live amid the ruins. This could be awful, but we don't know how to avert this calamity. The military has all the power.
At 3 p.m., 2 embassy police came and asked us to get all the refugees together so they could explain to them the plan of returning to their homes.
A Chinese man was with them who used to be a low-level Chinese army officer. In order not to be killed, he became a Japanese collaborator. When he was alone with Miss Vautrin, he told her not to let the young girls go. He wept as he spoke.
Their real object is to get these people away from us, who have been their protection during these terrible weeks.
If they do not go back, the refugees in camps will be driven out by soldiers.
Some of the refugees have registered and gone home hoping to live there peacefully. But unexpectedly, when the refugees arrived home, Japanese soldiers were seen hunting for women.
I shall never bring pressure on women to leave again. My experience on that was too bitter. One woman of 27, whom we urged to go back to her husband, was raped by 3 soldiers within 3 hours after she left us. I learned my lesson, and shall not easily forget it.
We have the possibility of a massacre, but I don't see myself staying out of sight while soldiers use bayonets on women and children who've trusted us.
I scolded 2 Japanese soldiers. The fellow in front was taking it all right, but the one in back was a surly fellow. He drew his bayonet and he made a pass at my middle. I stood my ground. But since his first pass was unsuccessful, he took his bayonet and held it to my neck for a moment. He muttered something in Japanese and jerked his bayonet forward, and I ducked my head back. It drew blood.
I fear that the military intends to clear the zone by force. The middle pass is the only open spot left in the garden. As I come outside, they all fall to their knees and cannot be persuaded to get up from the cold cement path until I give the following speech. The Japanese have publicly announced that you must leave the refugee camps, the zone, today. I personally shall not chase you away, but what can I, a single foreigner, do? Nonetheless, I'll try to prevent the Japanese from entering. When I return home in my car today, I am received with a royal salute. My poor refugees have formed 2 long lines. Then all my 600 parishioners surround me and give me a greeting written on a banner. They all bow 3 times, and are very happy when I bow my head in gratitude. Then one of my Chinese friends translates the greeting.
You are the living Buddha for 100,000 people. You have saved thousands of people from danger and want. May the favor of heaven be granted to you. May God's blessing rest upon you.
As is obvious from the letters that arrived from me yesterday from Shanghai via the German embassy, people there have not the vaguest notion of current conditions here.
And what do we do next? We've about shot our bolts.
At 6:40, I took the Japanese military train to Shanghai. I was crowded in with about as unsavory a crowd of soldiers as one could imagine in a third-class coach. Nervous because Sewed into the lining of my camel's hair greatcoat were 8 reels of 16mm movie film of atrocity cases, most of which were taken at the University Hospital by John McGee. They were so terrible that they had to be seen to be believed. My baggage would undoubtedly be carefully examined by the military when we got to Shanghai. What might happen if they discovered these films? The pictures shown herewith give but a fragmentary glimpse of the unspeakable things that happened following the Japanese occupation of Nanking on December 13th, 1937. One must remember that of the thousands injured, only a small percentage got to the hospital or were even heard of. These pictures have been taken with no thought of stirring up a spirit of hatred against the Japanese, but only with a desire to make all people realize how horrible war is. Great care had to be exercised not to be seen while taking pictures, otherwise the camera would have been smashed or confiscated. Fortunately, the reels weren't discovered. Washington. I was the guest of Undersecretary of State Dr. Stanley Hornbeck, whom I had known in China, and I was given the opportunity to see many people of importance, and I also showed my films to newspapermen and the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House. In Los Angeles, a couple of speeches were lined up for me, and one where I showed my films caused something of a sensation, even illness on the part of a couple of the audience. And following the meeting, a Japanese gentleman approached me and said that my statements about the atrocities in Nanking were not true. They could not be true, for Japanese were incapable of such acts. He asked me to retract some of the things I had said and intimated that it would be best for me if I did so. I told him that I had many Japanese friends and knew that most Japanese were incapable of such acts as I had described. But, I said, unfortunately, everything I said was true, and hence I could retract nothing.
The war has rolled on to engulf 1,000 other towns like ours. This story of invasion, massacre, rape, and oppression will be reenacted among countless communities in China. Nanking looks like a garden that's been devoured by locusts. The enemy creates a desert and calls it peace.
At the conclusion of World War II, the Allies convened a war crimes tribunal in Tokyo. From the summary judgment, approximately 20,000 cases of rape occurred in Nanking within the first month of the occupation. Estimates indicate that the total number of civilians and prisoners of war murdered in Nanking and its vicinity during the first 6 weeks of the Japanese occupation was over 200,000.
Do I hate the Japanese? No. I dislike very much their policy, and I dislike very much the way they are treating the common people of China. But if I'm ever given the opportunity of doing the same for the Japanese, as we have done here for the Chinese men, women, and children, I would do the same right over again.
我们的爱人呢，就是花小姐，她是人好哎，还不是讲嘛，她是大公无私的。我要不是花小姐的话，我不会幸美，什么事情不会幸美。
I have deeply loved and respected the cause of missions and Jingling College. Had I 10 lives, I would dedicate them all to this cause of kingdom building. But alas, I have failed.
花小姐就是我们中国的一个观音菩萨，就是菩萨老爷，神圣呐。所以这值得我们中国人民、中国的妇女特别的对她的敬爱。
Dearest, don't think for a moment that I wouldn't give my right eye to be with you and our unbelievably adorable child. We have been caught up in a cataclysm, and during the immediate crisis, until some light gets thrown upon future events, it is absolutely essential to sit tight.
We 我们应该怀念他，确实是对我们同胞的很大的一个救赎。
I do not regret having stayed on here, for my presence has saved many lives. But all the same, my suffering is indescribable.
他就那个大衣抱到我，下个雨嘛，他抱到我。他也不嫌我们脏，就穿那个破烂衣裳，也不嫌脏，他还拿那个衣裳抱到我们。我觉得这个外国人能这样子好的一个外国人。
如果不是他，否则那个经理，外界的几个组织了这么一个难民区啊，这部分人受害灭，不知道达到多少，我们肯定也死亡在里面啊。爱护这个为和平事业做出一些牺牲，对他们个人来说好像是应该的。
The Chinese have an unsurpassed capacity for suffering and endurance, in addition to their many other qualities. And right must triumph in the end. I shall always be glad I threw in my lot with them.